So we'll come back after the coffee break. I have the pleasure next to me to have Mr. Benedetti, who is a diplomatic advisor to the minister, to say a few words to us when we are here in the ministry. So please, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming and traveling to Roma. It's always a great pleasure inviting you and having you here. Unfortunately, the minister who was scheduled to be here she's not feeling well this morning. He has a terrible cough, so I have the honor to read the message that she would like to address the group and this workshop. Dear Agency Chair, dear Agency Director, dear members of the European Agency for Special Need and Inclusive Education, I am glad to send you my greetings as Italian Minister of Education, University and Research. At last, we can host here in Italy the first meeting of the European Agency. You all know that Italy has a long tradition as regards inclusive education. Since 1971, we have introduced children with disability into common classes. And since 1977, that is to say 38 years ago, special classes have been abolished. Ever since, we have been investing a lot of human and financial resources on inclusion. In our schools, class teachers are supported by special needs teachers who cooperate to realize inclusive pedagogy practices in classes where children with special needs are present. Apart from these resources, an important reform of our school system was approved last July. We call it the Good School Reform Bill, which introduces meaningful improvements also regarding inclusive education. Cardinal principles of our Good School Reform are potentiation of school autonomy, enhancement of teachers' professional value, improvement of students' achievements, and a better connection with the world of work, certainty of resources, requalification of all school buildings, reorganization of laws and regulation concerning education. This year, over 150,000 teachers have received a permanent job, and about 12,000 of them are special needs teachers. In order to support these measures, a remarkable effort is being done, which means 1 billion euros expenditure in 2015 and 3 billion when the law comes into its full effect. Moreover, as specifically regards inclusion, the following principles have been introduced. Compulsory in-service training, not only for special needs teachers, but also for class teachers. Acknowledgement of all forms of communication. Didactic project based on the pupil's strength and not on their weakness. Wider forms of collaboration with families and with all stakeholders, both institutional and non-institutional, who must work together to build up the student's life project. Introduction on universal design and reasonable accommodation in every kind of learning environment. All these represent a step forward in the direction of the 2009 ratification of the UN Convention on Disability Rights. It is worth noticing that the phrase special needs was created in England, as we can see in the Warnock Report, in 1978. Only a few months before, special classes were abolished in Italy. This gives sense to the commitment which started almost at the same time in various European and non-European countries. We have taken different roads, but today we are meeting to exchange views on a common basis, and this exchange of experiences, the study and investigation into other countries' realities, is extraordinarily enriching for all of us. Opening wide our windows upon Europe, observing and especially sharing similar procedures with the common aim of improving the quality of inclusive education is really an extraordinary opportunity. Also, this is a way to build up a common feeling, which is necessary to create a sense of belonging to Europe, an identity which unites all of us more and more, being founded on common ideas and values. Our representatives keep us constantly informed about the progress that the agency is showing and about the many projects that are being carried out together. Just to mention some of them, we can refer to raising the achievement of all learners in inclusive education, in which Italy is working together with Scotland and Poland, whose representatives are right here today in Rome. Thank you. ICT for information accessibility in learning, another very important issue for us, so that Italy issued a law about it already in 2004. Finally, inclusive pre-primary education project, whose results will help us to prepare a legislative decree referring to this specific theme, which is encompassed in the mandate of the Good School Reform Bill. Among the agency activities, I would like to emphasize the recent experience that our students, Lorenzo and Matteo, have made on the 16th of October at the European Hearing 2015 Take Action Luxembourg Recommendation. Such an initiative follows the UN Convention for the Rights of the Child, which states that all children have a right to be listened to by all those who represent them. In this logic of experience exchange, we have offered a pre-program also following the proposals of the previous biannual meetings. I know that some of you were able to take part in them, visiting school in 4 Italian cities and towns, Turin, Prato, Cortona, and Palermo, where they could observe what we call the Italian way to inclusive education. I hope you had a fruitful experience there. I also hope that the cultural program that we have organized, including a guided tour to Palazzo Madama, the main building of the Italian Senate, of the Quirinale Palace, the main residence of the President of the Italian Republic, is for you a pleasant and enriching one. Above all, I wish you all the best for a successful meeting here in Rome. In my function as Minister of Education, University and Research, I declare that we are at your complete disposal, supporting your very important association, hoping to have you back soon to visit Italian schools and our country. Thank you very much. Stefania Giannini.
Thank you for the nice words, and we are really feeling very welcome here to Italy and to this magnificent palace. So we are happy and honored to have our biannual meeting here, and we are also very happy to have had the pre-program before this meeting, which was excellent organized in all ways. So please give our thanks and regards to your minister and hope the best for her steps futures to be able to be active also even if she has not the possibility to participate today. So thanks once again. We looking forward to the meeting we are going to have here today. We are just now having a little thematics session about inclusion in higher education. And we will have a little discussion around that before lunchtime, and then we have our biannual meeting in the afternoon and some cultural activities later on. So many thanks for your coming here, and thank you for letting us use this wonderful palace. Thanks a lot.
I've been informed that our 2 friends from Spain who had a dialogue this morning will have to leave soon, in, say, 15, 20 minutes. So we have decided to give you the opportunity to, if you have a question, we can do it right now, and then we continue with the panel as programmed. So are there any questions for our 2 guests? Mr. Mesonero and Mr. Pineda. There's a question. Yes, please.
Yes, Paolo, I have a question to you. Because you studied for your first BA diploma to become a teacher for elementary school age children. I don't think that you had too much problem with the theory, but what did you do and how the schools reacted when you went there for practice teaching?
Bueno, a ver. Cuando hice mis prácticas de magisterio, fueron la reacción de la escuela, como la escuela era una escuela especial, bajo modelos especiales.
Well, when I got for the first time at the university, I thought that I could understand that it was a special school with special models.
Habían chicos y chicas con síndrome de Down y eso hizo que la reacción fuera buena. Los profesores, los compañeros que tenían los compañeros con síndrome de Down, todo era muy bueno, todo era muy especial.
When I got there, there were other people with the Down syndrome, so it has been quite easy because they were aware of what the problem was. So it was quite a special situation.
Y luego a mí me gustan mucho los niños y había mucho feeling entre los niños y yo, ¿no? De hecho, aún recuerdan ese periodo de niños entonces, ahora ya hombres, recuerdan todavía aquella época de las prácticas.
I like very much children, and it is nice for me to know that they're still thinking of me. Even they are adults now, but they're still thinking of me. They remember where I was working with them.
Are there any other questions?
Hi, I don't really have a question for you. We just are very happy to hear how much you have achieved, and that you had been given seeing the potential in and developing your finding. This is not planned, so sorry about that. And actually, that someone's seen your potential, and that you're being in the growth and seeing the possibility to have the growth in doing that, both in your acting career and also at university. I just want to say thank you for showing us that.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. Okay. Well, then we wish you a good trip home back to Spain. Now, I've heard you had another meeting, and we wish you all the best in the future, and keep us updated about the things you are doing, and I'd be quite sure that one day we'll meet again. Thanks a lot again, and have good trips home. Okay, good. We will now have a new panel here on this side of the table, and originally we had 4 panelists in the original program, but one of the panel members, Isabelle Toumain from the International Association of Universities, is ill, so she cancelled her participation here. But we have 3 excellent other experts. We have today with us Ulrike Greiner from Austria. We have Kristina Kovac from Hungary, and we have Oliver, and now I have to think about the pronunciation of your last name, but let me try, Shikluna. Is that okay? Yes, okay. Welcome, all 3 of you from Malta. I will introduce them a bit more in detail later on. So the idea of this panel is I will ask some questions to the panel members, and then we open it up for, then they have the time to make a few statements on their own, the issues, the trends they see, or the key points that they want to address. And then we open it up for discussion. And then we invite the speaker Sheila Riddell as well to this table, and so we have some time for discussions. I would like to start with a question for Ulrike Greiner. Ulrike is co-director of the School of Education of the University of Salzburg in Austria. And from 2006 onwards, she was director of 2 university colleges of teacher education in Austria. Welcome, Ms. Greiner. The first issue I would like to discuss with the panel members is to get an idea of how many students with disabilities are studying at your universities or plan to study at your university. Do you have any information on data on how many learners are studying at the university or planning to do so, and how many change their plans because of problems they might encounter? How many participate, and how many dropouts do you have in general? Can you spend some words on that for the audience?
Yes, of course. Thanks very much. Thanks for having invited me. So I tried to gather data, but it was not really. I was not successful at all levels. There is no systematic recording or registering of data about students with special needs at the University of Salzburg, especially in detail, especially data for dropouts or being successful. So, but I tried to gather data, and I can now refer to the data of the report of the Federal Ministry for Science in Austria. And when you look at Austria, we have 300,000 students in Austria, and 12% of all students in Austria state a disability or illness which impairs their studies. They are 12%. This is equal to 36,400 students. And this group is in its essential characteristics not different from the group of students as a whole regarding social background and other criteria of difference. But there doesn't exist special intersectional analysis in Austria. But the Federal Ministry gathers data, and they can show that however, only 1% of students state themselves that they have a disability. 12% of all students in Austria state some impairment, some illness, disability, but only 1% states themselves that they have a disability. That are 2,700 people, and out of these, approximately 2,100 people have a disability of more than 50%. This equals 6% of students impaired during their studies, and only 1,300 students have a disability pass. There's also a number of students who state a health impairment, which, however, does not concern them during the course of studies. But you see, only 1% states themselves having a real disability, and many of them don't have a pass because I think they are really afraid of being stigmatized. That's the main reason, the Federal Ministry says. And what I can say, 30% have a psychological impairment, 30%, and 24% a chronic somatic impairment. And these two major groups have in common that their disability is not visible. That are more than 50%, and they have invisible disabilities. The rest is distributed among different types of disabilities, and we have a working group, Uniability. This is a group of researchers and a working group, and they stated out that there's no category like dyslexia, specific learning difficulties. There's no category till now among all the categories we have. I think they refer to a medical model. For example, mobility difficulties, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, psychological impairment, but we have no category like dyslexia. And it's just the end, and at the University of Salzburg, with about 18,000 students, we have 12%, that's the average of Austria, 12% of students with disabilities.
May I continue to ask a question? So generally, the data does not allow you to say something about dropout or...
Yes, I'm very sorry. Okay. It doesn't allow us. I asked our Department of Diversity and Disability. We have an own department at the university that handles individual support for students, but they didn't give me data because otherwise they said we have no systematic recording.
Thank you. I'm sure you're not an exception on this issue. Now, Kristina Kovac, sitting next to me, she's a disability coordinator of the ELTE University in Budapest. And a very warm welcome to you, Ms. Kovac. My question to you is in line with the question I had before. Do you know of any participation data or dropout data of students with disabilities in your country or in your experience from higher education?
Thank you. In Hungary, we can register students with disabilities, but students with chronic illness are not registered, unfortunately, or students with mental problem cannot be registered either. We are fighting for it because we have ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as one of the first countries. And still, socio-psychological disability is still not a category in Hungary, unfortunately. So we have to fight for it. That's one reason I think that our statistics shows very low participation of students with disabilities in our higher education system. So it is about 1% only of the students attending universities in Hungary. And at my university, among 25,000 students, there are 310 students with disabilities, so we have a little bit higher percentage than the average of Hungary. The majority of our students who register with disability are students with learning difficulties. So it means that almost half of our students, this 110 students, have dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, dyscalculia, or mixture of these. It was very surprising when I made the statistics this year that the second largest group become students with visual impairments. So I was really wondering when Sheila had her speech why in Scotland the students with visual impairment are so underrepresented. The third largest group is students with physical disability, and the fourth one is students with hard of hearing. And the smallest group is students with speech impairment, and students with autism or Asperger's syndrome is becoming quite high. It means now we have 20 students with autism only at ELTE University. So this is about the statistics which I can tell you. I cannot tell you too much about the dropout because in Hungary you have a quite flexible higher education system, which means that you can study, well, almost as much as you can, or as long as you can. You are not dropped out. So for students, for example, with disability, BA, which is usually or typically 6 semesters or 3 years, they can study with the state support for 16 semesters. So it's very difficult to say when they finished or when they will continue. They can go away and come back. It's really flexible. I think that the government will change this because it is very difficult to sponsor higher education, which is mostly free of charge in Hungary. So I cannot tell you, but I have read and I have studied the special literature, what Sheila was also referred to, about the dropout, that most of the authors mentioned that there is no evidence-based data or research on the dropout of students with disability, but what they found, like Sheila also found, that there is one correlation, and this is the lower socioeconomic status of the students with disability and the higher risk of dropping out. That's the only thing. I have found only statistics on dropout from high schools, from secondary education, but not from tertiary.
Thank you, Ms. Kovac. We now go on with a question for my panel member on my left side, Oliver Scicluna. He is the chairman of the National Commission Persons with Disabilities in Malta. A warm welcome. Mr. Scicluna, I know you have a special interest on breakdancing and other types of dancing. I did Google you and I saw a very strange type of dancing. I would recommend you, if you have some time later, tomorrow or whatever, to put his name in Google and then you will see what happens. Unfortunately, not the topic of today. So my question to you is, do you think that higher education should be promoted much more as a feasible or viable career option for learners with disabilities or special educational needs? What is your view on that?
By the way, I stopped dancing.
You
so
stopped?
yes,
Oh.
I'm on break. In regards to your question, I think before focusing on a career job approach that a person with disability is supported to enter employment, to enter the labor market, I think we have to focus much more on higher education. And when we speak about disabled people, something that pisses me off is that we just put every disabled person in one pigeonhole. And something which concerns me a lot is I am a disabled person. I am a physical disabled person. And you are the so-called abled persons, non-disabled persons. But still, your characters may diverse from each other. So the problem here is that when we talk about persons with disability, we are talking about different impairments. So we are talking about different characters. So that is a more holistic way in how to view and how to discuss and how to approach several problems. To go to the subject about higher education, I talk on our problem in Malta is that at the moment we still have a lacuna between the secondary education and the tertiary education. And yes, there are institutions which offer courses for disabled persons, but in my opinion, that's still in a segregated environment. It's not fair that we talk of inclusion and we just talk about the environment. What I'm meaning here is having a class with full persons with disability attending in this class in a university or in a campus doesn't make it inclusive. So what I want to focus my argument on is that disabled persons want to be included in class, receiving the same curriculum, maybe in a different way, maybe in other arguments, including the universal design, as the Italian minister mentioned in her speech, in the universal design for learning. So obviously we need to promote. The European Union has to work and has to invest more opportunities in schemes, in funding schemes, to have a higher education which is inclusive for all. In our country, we have a long way to go, but I am certain that the government is committed to continue working on such initiatives.
Thank you, Oliver. I think you touched upon a very important issue, the distinction between disabled and not disabled, or having special needs or not having special needs, as a false distinction indeed, in my view. And I think that's one of the challenges, and maybe Sheila could say a few words about that later on. How do we go about this need for data on the one hand, which is important to monitor and to see progress or to see negative developments? So that request, the need for registration, the need for monitoring and so on the one hand. And on the other hand, we don't want to stigmatize, we don't want to label, we don't want to say you have disabilities and you don't have disabilities. Those two things, how that could be solved long term is really, I think, one of the biggest challenges we face. And it is the UN Convention Article 30, which requires data collection. I don't know exactly the number of the article, 30 something, which says that we should collect data. Countries should collect data. That's part of the UN Convention. And I simply don't see a solution, and I think that's something we should discuss much deeper in the agency, and I look forward if Sheila has some comments on that. As a feedback to your point, because I think you made it very strong comment on this. My second set of questions are focused on the type of practical challenges that we face in higher education to include, and I have to use the same words that I just rejected, to include learners with different type of special needs, and how do these challenges differ between, for instance, secondary education and universities or higher education. Christine, maybe you start with that point.
Yes. Okay, if we look at the student, him or herself, I think that one of the biggest challenges the students face too, and this is a big difference between secondary education and higher education, that he or she needs more independent skills. In secondary school, the student is supported by an itinerant teacher. There is a special teacher in the secondary school. There are parents who help, and everything is given in front of the child. So the child sometimes, and in many cases, which I can see, does not develop too much independent skills. Independent skills in everyday life, in everyday activities, which is needed to be more independent in orientation and mobility. Independency also means, for me, social skills or social competencies, which means that sometimes he has to learn how to ask for help. Or independent skills in studying, in learning. In many cases in Hungary, students are told by the teacher in secondary school what to make notes or take notes on. And it means that students really face to the problem that, okay, there is the lecturer who is very quickly talking. What should I write down? What I shouldn't? And at least how can I solve this problem? In the meantime, I have, problem, hard of hearing. I cannot look at the teacher in the same time, and note-taking, and so on and so on. And so that's another problem the student has to face. And the fourth one the student has to face is how to get accessible learning material. So I think this is really something new for a student, for the freshers. From the other perspective, from the parent side, the parent has to give free hand to their child. at a time when they go to university. In many cases, they go to dormitories, to students' hostel far from home. One thing. Second, it is not nice for the students, even with or without this disability, that a parent goes to the university or follow the student with disability to the university. In some cases, I have realized that the parent was even sitting during the lectures. And yes, because she did not believe that we can support the student with giving note takers. She said, no, I want to take notes. And of course, you say, okay, it's your right, but I don't think it's good for the students' independency and social skills. So it's the parents who sometimes wants to support and help much more than the students' needs. So it's, you know, the question whether to give the fish or to teach how to fish yourself. And the third point, I think, is from the university side, that in many cases the university staff, especially teachers, are not prepared to have students with disability in their classes. And in the same time, the contact between the student and the teacher, the lecturer at university level is not so strong as in secondary school. So I think these are the big challenges that makes difference for a student studying in secondary or in tertiary education.
Thank you very much. I remember the case, or the girl from Iceland, was it Freya, who wanted to study at the university, and that the university said, she came to the university, and the first reaction is, can we talk to your parents? I think it was her who said, why do you need to talk to my parents? They are not going at the university. I'm going to the, you can talk to me. And so this more active role in higher education, more autonomy, more empowerment, self-advocacy is much more needed than compared to secondary education. Well, very clear. Ulrike, have you something to add on this issue from your perspective?
Yes, I can follow the first argument, so I don't need to repeat it. But the second argument I can add, universities as institutions are part of a competitive system, much more than schools are, especially in Austria. They are part of a competitive system, namely of the international research community. And all achievements of universities are measured in the relation to their success in international research. So if students, and sometimes only if, they can succeed, they succeed because of their scientific performance at universities, and the researchers at universities call themselves responsible for single students as individual students, especially for highly gifted students, with or without disabilities, that doesn't matter, but there is one principle, the performing principle. Sometimes it leads the decisions of researchers to support students, because teaching at university is much more an area of autonomy than in schools, an area of autonomy where professors decide about whom and when they support. I think this is an important difference. So the other side, to support all students according to their individual development, is a new challenge for Austrian universities. And sometimes I see the contradictions in the issue. Inclusion are sometimes can be observed much more at universities, much more than at schools, because schools have the pedagogical system, and this has the ability to extinguish some tensions, because the pedagogical system refers to the possibilities in the future. Pedagogy always refers to the uncertainty and the possibilities in the future, and can handle the problems sometimes not in a dual not in dualism, but solving problems for all children. And universities sometimes show the contradictions between inclusion and exclusion, between the performance principle and the supporting principle. For example, it's the rigorousness that affected people in higher education demand that the positions of representatives for people with disabilities should only be filled by persons with disabilities. This is a hotly debate in Austria. And positions in the area of inclusion should also be filled by people with experiences. And I think there are some contradictions if we want to build a system of inclusion where all participate. These are some of my ads, but there are many similarities. For example, as early as possible, our representative for disability persons recommends that all university entrants with disability should visit the place of study of their choice half a year before the beginning of their studies, and they are welcomed to come half a year before to look and to examine the conditions and to prepare their degree. And there's much individual support for individual students.
Thank you very much. We just had a hearing in Luxembourg, and one of the slogans that we are working on is, you have the slogan from EDF, European Disability Forum, saying nothing without us, about us. Nothing about us without us. And we have now changed that into everything about us with us. And that's more positive. So that's the point you have made. Thank you for that. The question now is there a role for other organizations involved in the inclusive higher education? Are there any third parties who needs to be, or are there possibilities there to make inclusion working? Oliver, have you a view on that? Are there organizations who are really helping the inclusion working better? Do you need third parties for that, or is it just something between the student and the university?
From the Maltese perspective, because I always speak from experience, I see that there is a good networking between NGOs and the government departments and even the Commission. But still there is room for improvement. In regards NGOs, we have two large NGOs which work a lot in regards inclusive education, which one of them is Inspire Foundation and the other one is Equal Partners. My concern again about these two NGOs are that, in my opinion, there is still segregation in them, since they are offering the service just for disabled persons. And when I look at the work that is being carried out by the government department, the education department, I assume that that is the real inclusion that they are working for, because they are focusing on having disabled people in class, and not just in class, but trying to get their potential in the agenda. So we have a good networking, which still we need to work on. In regards to the Commission, since we act as a regulator of the disability sector, we are the watchdog of the sector. We receive several complaints in regards, for example, lack of learning support assistance, since in Malta we call them LSAs, learning support assistance. But we have a good relationship with the educational ministry, and from time to time we discuss these issues and try to come up with different solutions, and that works out completely well. So networking is essential. When I was preparing on this question, I thought about these last few months I've been researching about universal design for learning, and in my opinion, it's my holy grail, since this universal design for learning is about the why, the what, and the how. Why individuals want to learn, what they need to learn, and how are they going to learn. So that is a fruit for thought. We need to think about it, because I feel very concerned that time is passing by. We are having more disabled persons want to be included in the educational system. They want to take on a career and study. And if we lose time in trying to adopt this system, which from my research, it is working very well in the United States, we need to work very hard to try and understand it and try to engage in it, because we need to strengthen the engagement between the learner and the student. Motivation is the key, and we understand that it stimulates interest for learning as well. So as Christina said, that we need to, the teacher, the learner, needs to believe in the students, not just start asking questions before or prejudging before trying out the students. We need to give the chance, because we have cases, we have reported cases to the Commission that, for example, I'm remembering one similar case. As a person who has mild autism, he was reading a law degree, and in the fourth year, 2 years from finishing his course, he missed his exam by 1 mark, and by 1 mark, and he failed. So, and this is something that worries me, because there is potential in this person. I met this person, and he had to take another course. He still got a master's in European studies, but he's not a lawyer. So we have to give more opportunities. We have to widen our way of examining individuals.
Thank you for your plea for an inclusive design and a curriculum for all, which doesn't need to include special categories, but to have it up front at the start arranged. Christina, have you something to add on this area? Do you see a role of NGOs or other organizations in the process to inclusive education?
We have a very close contact with associations of persons with disabilities. We have an association of persons with visual impairment, with hard of hearing, you know. These are mainly protecting their own customers' rights, but they also help us, for example, when we organize sensibility training for the staff, when we can turn to them and ask their opinion about accessibility of the physical environment, for example. So, and also if we see that one of our students or more than one needs more independent orientation and mobility skills, for example, if the student is blind and if she is open to learn to travel with white cane, then we can ask also them to organize training, rehabilitation, basic rehabilitation training for these blind students. Or also we have good contact with the sign interpreter, different sign interpreter groups, and the municipality where the faculties are located.
Thank you. A question for Ulrike. In your experience, what has been done to make higher education more attractive for students with disabilities or special needs? Can you have some mention some practical things?
First, let me say that in Austria, the University Act of 2002 has set the conditions of studies at Austrian universities, the new University Act, and emphasizes that universities have to consider people with disabilities in all areas of responsibilities, which includes teaching and teaching methods. And there is mentioned that students have the freedom of learning methods according to the law, and this includes the right to an alternative mode of examination in Austria, and this obliges teachers in higher education to examine their modes of assessment and their modes of examination. And there you can see much is done in the fields of individual support. 17 universities in Austria have representatives at the university for students with disabilities. I call it in this way, and this is a staff position. There are departments of diversity and disability. They are called departments for diversity and disability. Here you can see the confusion in terminology a bit, diversity and disability, but these departments don't contain gender, for example, but they are called diversity and disability. And the representatives have fixed a wide array of activities. So I can add supervision of exams, assistance for students with special needs in all study affairs, also accompanying in conflicts and organizing. There are many activities. Nowadays, there are financial saving programs for the universities. So in Austria, the achievements of the universities in the field of individual support run the risk to become smaller because of the financial programs.
So it comes back to human resources, basically, as you suggested. What about technical or the role of new technologies? I don't know if the panel members have an idea about the role of new technologies that could support inclusion in universities or distance learning possibilities. Who wants to say a few words about that?
Yes, I can say a bit about learning environments. There are chances and there are dangers. I think it's just a field of tensions as well, that the chances are that there can be prepared individual materials in distance learning. I think we just need more impact on this to develop such materials. The danger is electronic learning environments produce new barriers as well. They shorten time for individual advice. They shorten time for personal discussions and personal counseling. But it is a very important field for the future. We have entrance examinations, assessments, as a admission, a new admission process, for example, in teacher education, and this is based on distant learning and electronic tests for teacher students. And here you see the tensions between chances and barriers, because this is now discussed in a very emotional manner in Austria, the new admission process for teacher students, because there are they test personality, attitudes, they test behavior, social social communicative skills, and 9% of the applicants fail. 9% because there are new data because of their social communicative requirements. For example, no ability for emotional recognition. And there is a debate about it is possible that everyone with a disability can pursue the study of his choice, but what's about the professions, teacher, law, medicine, etc.? There is a debate, should there be limited in terms of the requirements of these professions? For example, personality attitudes for teachers. Is there a limit of inclusion or not. And I think this is an ongoing process with some conflicts.
Thank you. Christina, I hear you sighing and disagreeing or nodding. You want to say something, I bet.
Yes, sorry, yes, because I think what you were talking about, it was nothing about technology.
Yes,
it
yes,
was
sorry.
absolutely the attitudes. How to make higher education even more sophisticated, even more selective, even more elegant, and you know, what you were talking. And I know it because we were studying the Austrian system of how a person, a typical student can become a teacher, and it is really difficult to become a teacher in Austria, for example. And it is really difficult, almost even impossible to get in if you have disability. I know what you were mentioning, that I don't agree with it, but of course I have nothing to do with your system. And sorry, but I don't like these kind of attitudes. I think technology has positive and negative side. I mean, it can be dangerous, but originally it's very good for admitting students with disability. There are very nice free open source softwares and programs and motors like the RoboBraille. I don't know whether you know about it. You can tell it to your students with disability to use it as a file converter. Or there is the NVDA, which is speech output, and it speaks lots of languages, and also free of charge. You can download it, I mean, your students. And lots of technology. The problem with technology, or Moodle, for example, as an e-learning method, which is also good, that the more we use technology, the more attention should be put on whether this new technology is accessible or not. And in many cases, there are fantastic technologies which originally not accessible. And then it costs a lot of money and it costs a lot of energy to make them accessible. Like during the last workshop on ICT for All, we were talking about a lot. So originally, universal design should be in front of all designers, but it's still not. So that's why the technology has problematic part as well.
Thank you very much. Well, we don't want a disagreement, or yeah, you can have disagreements, but we don't want a fight between Austria and Hungary here behind the table.
No, we are good friends.
You are good friends. That's the point I wanted to make. This is not about personal beliefs, but it's more like a difference in systems that have historical roots that makes things as they are in some countries. Oliver, have you something to add on the area of new technologies that your experience that is very important for yourself or for your?
Not about new technologies, but again, my concern here is we are talking about technologies for disabled persons, for persons with disability. So there are different type of technologies and different concerns. For example, I bet you mentioned distance learning. There are benefits for having distance learning. In my opinion, in my country, we don't need it because it's a small country. All right, we have traffic problems, but we don't need it. And honestly, if it can be done in other countries, I will not opt for distance learning because we have to also focus not just on the academic side, but also on the social side. It's good to be at university campus during the break, enjoying activities with your peers, not just in class, listening or sleeping or trying to get things sorted. But yes, technology is improving. In fact, in Malta, we have the Foundation for Information Technology, which focuses on accessibility. It's called FITA. And together with that organization, with that entity, all of the departments, all of the stakeholders working in the disability sector try to liaise with each other and work accordingly. Although the main problem is that technology comes with a price. And it's difficult for the state to have to budget for the amount of resources, of technological resources needed to accommodate all of the students. So I know that the government is trying to work hard for that. For example, they're giving out tablets, which it will benefit for disabled persons as well, because you might have visually impaired disabled persons who will benefit from a use of a tablet. But in other regards, for example, even a person with autism, with communication impairment, they will benefit from them. So our main issue, our main problem remains that technology comes with a price, and we have to deal with that. I think our government has to deal with them like other governments in other countries.
Thank you very much. And I hear you saying it is about belonging, participation, and a framework that includes all, instead of making different arrangements for different groups. If you make different arrangements, it's different arrangements for everybody, including. That's what you're saying. To talk about the transition phases from school to higher education, and from higher education to work, do you see any improvement there in the past years in your country, or?
Definitely yes. The most common issue we face in our country, surprisingly, is transport. Transport to
when is this road ready in your country?
What?
This new road that you are constructing, when is that ready?
We have different roads which are under construction. The big one is ready just now, okay. The coast road. It's ready. But, all right, I'm deviating from the educational subject, but from my point of view, from my role, that is my experience. Most of the persons with disability have a problem with getting to the school, to the institute, to the campus. So that's our main huge. We have other problems, but I am sure they are being tackled. But that is one of the problems. And in the question in which Marcella sent to us, there was a mention in regards moving to other places, for example, living in an independent living environment or supported living environment. Also, the government in Malta is working hard to open up new residential homes, new supported residential homes, which will help. But as I said before, Malta is very small, so most of the people will opt for to keep on living with their parents, or either it's not in our culture. Even if you don't have a disability, you live with your parents until you get married, and if you don't get married, you stay with your parents.
Thank you for this insight in the multi-social relation. I think we have heard now enough. I would like to give the panel speakers 2 minutes each to say what are the key topics for further action that are needed in the future on this area. Christina, can I start with you?
Yes,
you pressed the button before I even asked you.
Sorry, because I have to leave,
okay.
Really.
Okay, then Christina.
Yeah, well, even though you are absolutely right that we cannot use terminology disability as a general terminology, because there are so much differences between even the subcategories and even, of course, person by person. What I would suggest to do some research rather using subcategories of disabilities than the whole umbrella terminology as disabilities, because there is so much difference between the situation of a student with visual impairment than of a student with autism, totally different. And in many cases, many students do not call themselves disabled. So What if we deal with this, topic as students with hard of hearing and deaf, students with et cetera, and make evidence-based studies on and research on that. I think that would be one important thing, I mean, from the field of research. The other, that the ministries do not deal, I think, this problem or this issue as students with disabilities in higher education do not give as high rank as they do the students with special needs in elementary and secondary school education. I think that ministries think that universities have autonomy, so they just give us the law and then you do what you can. I mean, I feel that there is not too much support which we can get in Hungary from the ministry. There is even not a person who has a job, anything to do with higher education and disability. There is a nice lady who does this just because she's interested in it and because she has a background of special education. But not in the case of elementary and secondary school and special needs education, where there are persons who deal with this.
I'm sure that is the case in many countries, this autonomy of universities and ministries say, this is your job and we are not involved. Can I ask you, Ulrike, you have to go now? So no questions for you later. Okay, thank you very much for being with us today. You fly home now? Okay. Thank you, Christina. Good trip home then. Ulrike, do you want to share with us one key message or one trend that you hope to see in the near future?
I think it must be a mixed strategy, especially for universities. And I think the institutional leaders of universities should take more responsibility in higher education to think about their future opportunities. The support system, the individual support system, should be, of course, should be opened. And how can we open it without losing the categories of disabilities to give support, and otherwise opening for non-traditional students? This terminus non-traditional students is I think we must deal with the terms of disability, difference, diversity, and there are questions in the future how we can open it, and at the one hand, and at the other hand, how we can deal with those categories. And I think competence learning for teachers in higher education, competence teaching about competence learning, and teaching to make competence learning possible can be a roundabout way for teachers in higher education to find together a meaningful way. We have some courses for teachers in higher education because this is a challenge at Austrian and at all European universities. What does it mean not only to give knowledge, but to make possible to learn competencies? And the third, handling with the models of inclusion. There should be and is some research. Have we the medical model or a social model, a socio-economic model, referring to Professor Riedel? I think it was very interesting to see which model can we develop, or do we have a model with a holistic approach, including intersectional analysis?
Okay, thank you very much. Olaf, I give you the last chance to say a few words to the audience about the things you hope to see in the near future or the trends you expect.
I am going to mention 5 points, which I might have mentioned them before, but it's good to emphasize, as I has the opportunity. Our differences. So we need to focus on different needs, and these different needs might come across with different characters, different disabilities, and as Professor Riedel said, even social background. So we need to focus on that. Secondly, we need to focus on the approach, which I have talked enough, mentioning universal design for learning, in which we need to have representation of different resources. Knowledgeable learners are not just the people we need, but we need to have such people prepared and ready to present information and content in different ways. Therefore, can be understood by many diverse individuals. Learners need to identify goals, and students have to understand them. Therefore, the learning experience will be goal-directed oriented. It is very important that students have the time to express what they know and what they have learned. Thirdly is the most important part is the structural support system. In our country, we have the learning support assistant, but in my opinion, we should also have personal assistants. So we need to understand what is the role of an LSA and what is the role of a personal assistant, because a student might just need a personal assistant. For example, in my case, when I used to go to school, I just used my crutches. I walk around. The students, my peers, had responsibility as well. They have learned that I needed their support as well, so they were there for me. And I wasn't cornered out. I was part of them, and I'm talking about this, where I attended the time where Malta was making a transfer from special schools to mainstream schools. So it was a difficult time. And still, students, because the teachers and the headmaster at that time believed in me, students counted me as, at the time, their king. But I was included, fully included. And I'm proud to say that, because the fact that I got so far in my career is because of that, because teachers believed in me, parents believed in me, the headmaster believed in me, and most of all, my friends believed in me. So I succeeded. That's the most important part. The other point is a common understanding of inclusion. I talked to several people, and every person have different understanding of inclusion. What I was happy about is to hear the Minister of Malta, the Minister for Education in Malta, mentioning that he's focusing and to get a common understanding of inclusion. And I am sure that it will help and it will put us on the right track in having all the people working in this sector to understand what is inclusion and commonly understand it. The last point, all right, I'm boasting about the work that is being done by the government, but I will be the first person to attack the government, if the Maltese government, if we go off track. But at the very moment, I am very happy because the disability agenda is on the national agenda, and it hasn't been there for many years. So when we talked about statistics here, also the government is working on a national database, which, all right, it will not be ready by tomorrow, but because it's still in phase 1, but we are working on it. Malta is small; it's about 450,000 people living in Malta. Not everyone will register on this database because most people with several disabilities don't want to register themselves. For example, the Commission just have 15,000 persons registered with it, so I am sure there are many disabled persons, much more many disabled persons in Malta. And the last but not least, I encourage you to start working on, all right, we did a leap from the medical model to the social model, but after all, we should make another leap to the human rights model, because after all, we are humans, we have different needs, we have different orientations, so in fact, that is what we are trying to achieve in Malta as well, to have a human rights institution, and we will be representing ourselves as persons with disability who might be LGBT, who might be of another coming from another country. So I urge you to keep that in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like now to applaud the panel for the excellent work. Thank you for your wise words and critical words and constructive words. And I will now open the time for some questions. Sheila, you want to come to sit with us and answer some questions? We still have about 20 minutes for some discussion or questions or comments. So who wants to kick this off in the audience? Who has a question for one? I'm sorry that some of the panel members have left, which you might have a question for, but we couldn't do much about that. But we have still here 3 very intelligent people behind the I don't count myself, so it must be the other. Are there any questions? We have an expression, if there's one sheep over the bridge, more will follow. We have, sorry to mention you as the first sheep, but that's a Dutch expression that we use for questions.
Hi, the first sheep is Andy Tyman from England. Thank you for your presentations, thank you for your thoughts. One thing that we didn't cover was the makeup of the workforce in higher education and the representation. It struck me when I was listening to Pablo what a fantastic role model he was and what an opportunity that was for as a role model. Have you any thoughts about the workforce in terms of data collections and so on and so forth?
Who wants to reply?
A few years back, I was involved in a piece of work that was sponsored by the then Disability Rights Commission, which was looking at the operation of fitness to practice standards in education, social work, and nursing. And what we found was that even though students in those courses were prepared to disclose at university, as soon as they went into their working life, they did not disclose a disability. And the reason for that is that there was some incentive to disclose at university in terms of getting additional support. But as soon as you went into the labour market, there were big fears about stigmatisation. So people tended not to disclose. So for example, only about 1% of the teaching workforce in Scotland discloses a disability. It's very, very low. People think that they're not going to get reasonable adjustments, their job might be on the line. And of course, the type of, some people may well have problems with anxiety and depression, and these tend to be enormously stigmatized things for workers to disclose. So I think we've got an awful lot of work to do in terms of making it okay for people to disclose. In universities as well, a very low proportion of the workforce discloses a disability.
Thank you. And may I add directly to you, Sheila, the question that I had earlier on, the dilemma between data collection and categorization and so on. On the other hand, not to want to stigmatize students who don't want to register even as being disabled at universities. How do we see, do you see a way forward?
Well, of course, this is a classical dilemma about whether the advantages of disclosure outweigh any disbenefits that may occur as a result of stigmatization, marginalization, and so on.
Can you put that differently?
I definitely don't think we want any sort of compulsory registration system. This has very, very bad echoes across Europe from, you know, historical periods. So it always has to be self-disclosure. And there always have to be good reasons for people to want to disclose. In other words, they need to be pretty sure that they're going to get a sympathetic reception, sensitivity when they want the information to be kept confidential, but that reasonable adjustments to the environment, to teaching and learning, will be put in place to help them. So there have to be incentives for this to happen. And that does mean that we're never going to get very firm data, of course. That's a downside.
Another question there, Judith?
No, maybe just adding on to that, Judith Hohenweger, Switzerland. I mean, there are other ways of collecting data by looking at the whole student population and just talking about their problems. We did a study 12 years ago just doing that. And then you can ask whether the problems that they have are actually health-related or not. And if you do something like that, you will find out that a lot of students with, quote, disabilities have a lot of normal problems that all the students have, and it doesn't have anything to do with their disability. And I think this is the kind of data that we need, because it will show where the university needs to change something about being more inclusive for all students, rather than labeling again individual students.
I know there's somebody over here, isn't there? Can I just comment on that very, very quickly? I mean, I think in the UK there has been a move not recently, over decades really, to move towards the universal design principle, so that it is about making learning accessible for all. So just as an example, when I'm teaching a course, it is expected that any reading matter for the course is up in our electronic system, it's called Learn, at least 4 weeks before delivery, so that students can download the material in any format that they wish. My PowerPoint for any presentation has to be uploaded at least a week before the class, so that again, students can get access to the material. And this isn't up to the autonomous decision of the lecturer. We've been through these debates in the UK. This is a university regulation. And so to fulfill the contract of your job, this is what you have to do.
Okay. I saw Philippa there having a question.
Hello, Philippa Stobbs from UK, England. Recognising the dilemma that you've crystallised, Core, about the categorising and gathering data and the pluses and the minuses and the balancing that. It seems to me that we, in all the presentations we've had, there is an element of self-declaration, which is actually sort of increases with age, if you like. So in higher education, it sounds to me as if it is mostly self-declaration, though Christina's point was about the some impairments didn't count, interestingly. It seems to me increasingly it depends how you ask the question. And I was reflecting on some work that was done in England about 10 years ago, which the research itself was labelled, have you got a disability, yes or no, or is there a better way of asking the question? And that was the title of the report. And what the research found was that in some forms that the students were asked to complete, there was a question that said, do you have any criminal convictions, yes or no? Do you have any disability, yes or no? And when you ask it that way, not many people say yes. But it seems to me that bit of self-declaration needs to move much more towards the question of whether you need reasonable adjustments or support in place in order to be able to access any of the activities associated with your being in higher education. And I wonder whether that has been explored in any of the data gathering, whether it's been explored from that angle, i.e. going in through support needs, just aware that sorry, I'm gone, but a head teacher at a school who did not want to write down on a register whether a child had a disability or not, simply registered whether they needed reasonable adjustments or not. And that seemed to me to be a way into this dilemma.
Thank you for your comment. Philippa, reaction?
Well, I think that the increase that I showed in disclosure, self-disclosure in UK universities is directly tied up with the building up of the university's responsibility to meet students' needs, the legal requirements to do so, the availability of disability support in all universities, the availability of aids and services and so on, so that students are increasingly willing to disclose a disability. I mean, in fact, when you're getting about 13 or 14% of students disclosing a disability, that's a higher proportion than in the whole of the population. So we are not seeing underrepresentation of disabled students. We are seeing, and it's of course a higher proportion than, according to certain definitions, we have in school. So I think that I completely agree with you. It is entirely up to how the question is posed and what the student expects to happen as a result. But it says a lot about the labour market at the moment, that people will disclose at university, but not in the labour market. People are very frightened of their jobs.
Okay. Yes, please, Dominika.
Dominika Radic from Austria. I think we have one problem, one thing we have to overcome. This is, on the one hand, in the schools, at the schools, we have the problem of overprotecting, helicopter parenting, helicopter teaching, and in the higher education, we are missing very often individual support and possibilities, sometimes equipment and so on, for students with disabilities. It seems to be a big problem which I think the systems and institutions have to overcome. I think it's a big problem.
Thank you, Dominika. This was a comment. Yes, you agree that this was a comment and not a question, yes? Yeah.
A comment?
You can give a comment to the comment.
Quite short. I think in the background we can see that schools have learned to describe themselves and to understand themselves as an institution that is able and is prepared to take responsibility for all the other learners inside. In Austria, we have a process of development of schools, and they take the responsibility. And on the other hand, universities are institutions. I told it that are in another system. They are in an international system, and they have to learn too. In my opinion, universities have to learn to take their responsibility for the outcomes of learning at their institution. But that's a long way, because there are contradictions to the international field of competition, and there we have no gifts and no. They are not. They don't get awards because of this, because of their quality of learning, but they get awards because of their quality of research. When I see the University of Salzburg, where I am, and I see where are the grants and where is the support, I see it's just the point of the outcomes of research, but not the points of the outcome of the quality of teaching and learning, but it increases. We all see that the problem comes, and there are many more people that see that we should be engaged to increase the quality of teaching, and this is the quality of inclusion.
Well, in the UK, the government has just issued a green paper, a discussion paper, which is meant to be tackling this issue. The government in the UK is saying there has been too much focus on research grown in UK universities and not enough focus on the quality of teaching. So In the UK, as some of you may well know, we have had every 5 or 7 years this thing called the Research Excellence Framework, where every academic is graded on the quality of their research. Huge controversy. It's very publicly naming and shaming. There's not many professions where that type of grading actually happens. And the UK has become hugely competitive, and all of the European countries are trying to play catch up actually with the UK. But now the government has decided that we have to chase a different ball, which is to do with teaching excellence. We are to have a thing called the Teaching Excellence Framework, when our teaching is all going to be graded, and it's going to have a huge financial incentive attached to it, because as you probably know, the UK, England, charges tuition fees to students of £9,000 per year, very high. They're not payable up front. Students take out loans and then repay them. Scottish students don't have to pay for their tuition unless they study in England, and students from the rest of the UK studying in Scotland have to pay, so it's a very complicated system. But for the fees to go up, the government has said, you have got to get top ratings in your teaching. So you can see that this agenda has swings and roundabouts attached to it. There is going to be a big focus on teaching excellence, and they have said that widening access and inclusion is going to be part of what's being assessed, so that's good. But the hidden or not so hidden agenda here is that this is tied up with bumping up tuition fees even higher.
Thank you. More questions or comments? We ready for lunch? Or Gudni has one last, just in time, Gudni.
Yeah, thank you. Gudni Olgesson from Iceland. Just not a question about this, the rating and accessibility of the universities for disabled, but more general question, a short. I mean, the role of the university level to promote inclusion in general in society. I mean, not only for access of the students, but for, can you see any, just a small point on that? I mean, to promote it in general, inclusive society.
Good question. Those who teach the teachers, are they putting them on track of an inclusive school or society? Any comment from?
Well, I think that we would try to do that, but we don't always model very good inclusive practices, I would say, in the characteristics of who is actually doing the teaching. I mean, if you look around at the teaching workforce in universities, I think certainly in the UK, you would find that there was underrepresentation of people from minority ethnic backgrounds. There would be underrepresentation of disabled people. There would be underrepresentation of people from poorer backgrounds. So we speak the words, but we don't always model that. And I think the modelling is really important, and I'm sure Oliver would probably agree with me on that.
Something which I may add is that, all right, that I think it's being done in several countries, including our country, but what we lack is that there are no people with disabilities involved in this procedure. We need to see more disabled persons speaking out to teachers who are going to work with disabled students. It is researched and it is found successful that when a person with disability passes on the message, it is more strong. And we had an example today. We had Pablo here who teaches, and he said it himself that his pupils still remember him. And we have the same examples in our country when disabled persons themselves passes on information, passes on knowledge, it is more stronger. I'm not saying that non-disabled persons are not part of our society, but I am emphasizing on the fact that disabled persons need to be involved and given the front line in such situations.
Thank you. I think it's now about time for some final words on this side. The agenda says that I should summarize the whole thing, and I don't want to do that simply because I can't. We will put everything that has been prepared for this event, the report that Sheila is working on, as well as the presentations here and the conclusions, into a report which we will have ready for you, hopefully in a few months. And then you can use it for whatever action you need. I hope you like the idea of having a short session like this for, we'll say, 2.5 hours, where we focus on one issue and see what the state of the art is with some experts, and that you can go home and say, listen, this is something that I've learned today. Before closing this, Sheila, do you want to, maybe not to summarize, but say the last wise words from the morning? You've done so many already, so...
Yeah, I'm not sure that wise words. I mean, I think everybody's probably getting a bit tired and hungry right now, actually. So I think I've found all the sessions really interesting. One of the things that struck me from the past discussion session is the different proportions of disabled students. I think Christina said that in Hungary, only 1% of students disclose disability. That's really, really striking, because only 1%. Okay, so I mean that's a complete contrast with the UK, when we're looking at 14% of students disclosing a disability. So obviously we are presenting the whole thing in completely different ways at the moment. I think it would be a good thing if we could learn from each other, if we could move towards some more harmonisation in this area. I know this is one of the things that the EU is meant to be promoting, whilst at the same time preserving national sovereignty and so on. But I think we could move a bit closer together and learn from each other on this.
Thank you very much. So, I close this panel for today. I hope you enjoyed it. We are now going for lunch, which is on the same floor, Morten. We go through the hallway and then... No, the lunch is here at the opposite room as we had a coffee, right? Okay, good. Morten takes over now, as he used to.
Right. Well, you're right, Cor. Lunch is just next door. But after this session, we'll move to another meeting room. So please gather your things and take them with you. And we'll just walk through the corridors. It's very short, but you've seen there are many doors and rooms here. So in order to be ready to start the next session in time for the biannual meeting, the joint meeting, we will meet out here after lunch, or when the lunch finishes, at 10 minutes past 1. So at 10 minutes past 1, and then Rafaele and Rosaria and their colleagues, they will guide us to the meeting room. So please be ready here 10 minutes past 1. Okay?
Okay, then one last applause for the panel members and the session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. I love your words. Though I do not agree with the other things. A lot of micro-exclusion.
What was what is happening in the students are being given lesson and in my opinion more facilities. For example, I know kids with spina bifida, which is my parent. I've never had an LSA. I never had an LSA.
Sometimes the teacher gives the responsibility to somebody else while it should be the teacher.
And that's not inclusion.
That's not inclusion, that's micro-exclusion.